First, I was shook when I realized that this was Angela Lansbury because I missed her name in the opening credits. And this scene is so expertly shot with Ingrid Bergman's Paula right in the center of the frame. It is so good. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych Podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and we're going back in time in this episode to explore the origins of an often used word in our current vernacular. That's right, we're talking the film Gaslight. Now, we are going to explore the 1944 MGM version of this movie, as opposed to the fact that it was a remake of a 1940 British film. And I imagine the stars, the director of the 44 version, the one we're talking about today, is likely the reason why this one shot to stardom. I mean, Ingrid Bergman won Best Actress, and the costume designers won Best Production Design. So, or maybe those are two separate categories. I'm not sure. But in any case, this film is a remake of a 1940s film, which was a play written by Patrick Hamilton, where the term gaslight is a singular word, a compound word in both films. It was gas, space, light for the 1938 stage play. And so we are going to get into a whole ton of things associated with not only the term as it exists today, how it's used today, but why it's referred to as gaslighting. And that's because of what happens in this movie. So just to break it down for you, this was a George Cukor directed film. And it stars Charles Boyer as Gregory, the husband who does the gaslighting. Ingrid Bergman, as I said, she won the Best Actress Oscar for her portrayal as Paula. Joseph Cotton appears as a police detective officer. I don't know. He's kind of like assistant to the commissioner. I'm not entirely sure. But in any case, the thing that got me was I wasn't watching. I looked away during the opening credits, and this was a period of time in American cinema and cinema in general where the credits were at the beginning of the movie, not at the end like they are today. And I missed and introducing Angela Lansbury. This was her film debut. Her film debut, 1944. She plays the maid. She plays one of the maids, and she plays the sort of paid servant to Paula's character, right? So there's a lot in this movie to unpack. But I was really pleasantly surprised by Angela Lansbury being a part of it and just being the coy person that she is. Quite the role she got to start with, right? So one thing to note about this movie, in 2019, the film was selected for preservation by the U.S. National Film Registry at the Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And I gotta say, culturally, absolutely. Aesthetically, George Cukor did a phenomenal job. Not only lighting this movie, it's in black and white. You got to have the right light for black and white films. not only lighting this movie, adding to the tension, but also the production design. I won the Oscar, like I said. And just the interplay between Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman, two non-American actors, so speaking with their natural accents from their respective countries in an American film set in London. I mean, it's phenomenal all the way around. And I gotta agree with the Academy here. Ingrid Bergman does a fantastic job of portraying someone who feels like they're slipping into some kind of unsustainable psychosis, like just like falling deep down, like almost like Get Out vibes, falling into the sunken place, right? She almost and she slowly over the course of like an hour, almost 2 hours, is just like pulled deeper down into this. Well, and I know I'm being coy about the plot on purpose, because the plot is going to be a part of our psychological discussion here. And so it's important that I kind of keep it not secret, but it's coy, so we can organically go through each of the things that Cooker wanted us to do, and how Charles Boyer's Gregory Anton kind of puts Paula in this state of deepening psychosis, deepening insanity, as she calls it. And it's a wonderful film, and we've got a great guest to help us explore it. So let's get into it. My guest host today is friend of the show, Dr. Wind Goodfriend. She's a professor of psychology at Buena Vista University in Iowa. This is her record 7th appearance. So every time she's on, she ends up being the new record holder always. So this is her record 7th appearance on the show. Wind, how are you since you were last on the show?
Alex, thank you so much for having me back. Lucky number 7. I'm doing great.
Doing great. Well, I'm so happy to have you back on, because the last time we talked, I wanted to, and it was completely, the last time we did talk was completely like for something else. But I'm like, you know what? While I have you, or you wanted to do another show, and I knew you were doing your psychofilm again, and that's always a deep well to draw from, since we've done that in the past. So you mentioned a few movies, and then you trickled down, I think at the end of the list, you were like, then there's Gaslight.
Yeah.
So we'll get into Gaslight, and that's why we're back together again, is to talk about Gaslight. But I first want to find out how you've been doing since the last time we talked. Any new projects, since you've got a ton of stuff in the hopper always.
Well, exciting things that have just recently come out for me would be 2 things for a general audience. One is my co-edited book that just came out yesterday, as of the recording day here, which it was election day yesterday. And so as of recording, the new book for a general audience that I co-edited is called The Handmaid's Tale Psychology, Seeing Off Red.
Excellent.
And so it's a collection of various contributors who wrote the chapters, including I wrote 2 chapters for the book. And it's various psychological concepts in Margaret Atwood's world of The Handmaid's Tale, both the books that she wrote and the series on Hulu.
Nice. Interestingly, Margaret Atwood has been in the news quite a bit recently, and that is when she talks about this. I find this hilarious. When she talks about her work on The Handmaid's Tale and all of the, the research and everything that she's done for her books, for the TV show, all of that stuff. And then somebody comes, and it's usually a man, mansplains to her, no, that's not what the Handmaid's Tale is about. And it's like
on her own book.
Right. It, like to her on social media. And it's like, do Do you realize who you just commented to?
Wow.
Like she probably knows. What else came out?
The other general audience, it's not actually a book, it is a docu-series. So
okay,
you are a fellow Great Courses contributor, creator.
Right. Yeah.
And so my docu-series with the Great Courses just came out a couple of weeks ago.
Awesome.
And so it's 12 episodes on the psychology of cults, cult recruiting, cult indoctrination, cult leaders. How do you get out of a cult and heal from a cult? So that just came out a couple weeks ago.
And it sort of follows that flow. So the later episodes are getting out and healing, that kind of thing.
Right.
Okay, exactly, excellent. Yeah. Probably have to check that out because that sounds really interesting. So it's a video series, video course,
video series, and then I think it's also offered as an audiobook as well.
Right. Yeah.
And Very then. Cool. For any psychology teachers, instructors who are listening to this podcast, my new intro psychology textbook also just came out about a month ago, and that's called Psychology and Our Curious World, published through Sage Publications.
That's awesome. Having your own intro textbook. That's where you make it. It's where you make it.
Well, let's hope it's brand new. And I also always like to share that a large portion of the proceeds go to charity. So I'm happy about that.
Very cool. Awesome. Do you want to name the charities?
I would love to.
Go ahead.
So we actually have multiple charities that we are supporting. So each author has actually chosen charities that they want to support. So I've actually decided to split my portion to two charities. Half of it is going to the Wounded Warrior Project that helps U.S. veterans. Right. And the other half is going to the Trevor Project, which is the charity in the United States that helps the most suicide preventions for LGBTQ youth.
Right.
There are 3 co-authors. So one of the co-authors is giving her charity proceeds to the Thurgood Marshall Foundation, which is specifically going to give scholarships to people of color to go to historically Black colleges and universities. Another co-author is giving his portion to the Make-A-Wish Foundation for children who have fatal illnesses, basically.
Yeah.
And then the final charity is called Glass Roots, which is actually a charity. It's a smaller charity.
Okay.
It's in New England, and it combines glass, like blown art, and teaching youth in that part of the country entrepreneurial skills. So it's combining art and business.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. And it's geared toward youth, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I can't wait to see what that is. Sage will probably send me a desk copy.
I hope they do.
The funny thing is I don't even ask. They just, all of these publishers are just like, here you go.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, calm down. But let's
check out the book, please.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Check out the book, check out the docuseries, the cult stuff. Oh, why is it so prescient? I'm just going to say that now. Whew, boy.
Yep.
Our discussion today is also kind of prescient, mainly because of the little factoid that we have regarding Gaslight, of Gaslight. So what I want to know first is, why do you include this film in your psych and film class?
Yeah, part of it is my students, I've noticed more and more, use the term gaslight kind of nonchalantly, and mostly they're using it correctly, but more and more I notice that they use it kind of humorously, or they certainly have no idea what the origin of the term is. They don't know it comes from this movie, which of course was originally a play. They don't really know what the context of the word is. And so partially I use this as a history lesson to know what is the origin of this term.
Yeah.
But also because when I show films on this topic of relationship violence, usually the film focuses on physical violence.
Yeah.
And I really like that this film has psychological violence, and there really aren't that many films that really feature the psychological kind of manipulation that can go on in an intimate relationship.
Yeah, I find that to be a great endeavor, combining the cinema history, cultural history, and then just like another aspect of how abuse can occur in a relationship. I find it interesting that you say that your students use it mostly correctly. I find the exact opposite when I hear my young students use it. And we'll get into what it is and what it isn't in a moment, but I feel like overall they're using it in a way that reflects the momentary passing rather than the long journey that gaslighting technically is, right? And I think that's attributable to the film itself too, because we're talking about a long stretch of time. We don't really know how much time has passed. We know that Gregory and Paula are together for 2 weeks before they get married and head back to London. But, we don't really know how much longer it's been for the rest of the movie. What was that factoid that makes it prescient, though, that you wanted to share?
Yeah, so I actually remember when this happened in 2002.
I do as well.
Merriam-Webster always chooses a word of the year. And so in 2002, gaslight was the word of the year. I'm sorry, I'm saying 2002. You're right, absolutely, 2022. Their word of the year was gaslight. And I remember being really excited about this being their choice. And thinking oh, people are going to go watch the movie and research on relationship violence is going to be in the media, and that totally did not happen.
Yeah, absolutely not. That was asking a lot.
Yeah, so I was excited for nothing, which happens a lot, I guess, in the world of psychology. I thought, all these wonderful things will happen.
Yeah.
And no, people just started using the word, and apparently many of them are using it incorrectly.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends, right? You're in Iowa, I'm in Illinois. There's definitely a cultural difference there too.
That is true.
So yeah, I thought this was interesting. By 2022, had Gaslight been in your course, or was it a more recent addition?
No, I started adding it just the last couple of years that I've taught the course. I wasn't using it before, partially because this term wasn't really in the lexicon until more recently. So I was using it sort of in research to refer to this sort of psychological abuse that happens. But most of my students hadn't really heard the term gaslighting until maybe about 5 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've only added it to the syllabus for the last couple of times that I've taught the course.
Interesting how you take the cultural impact of a tiny little word, right? And it becomes part of the instruction, right? And using the film here, the whole purpose of this podcast, really, using that film there to teach these this subject, these subjects, these concepts so very clearly and vividly. How do they feel about it being black and white?
It's funny too, because normally when I tell my students the movie we're watching this week is black and white, there's sort of this collective groan, oh man, we're going to hate this movie. It's going to be so boring and slow. There are no car chases or explosions. And this film, they really like.
It's captivating.
Absolutely. It's kind of combination of true crime and horror. And they really get into the creepy, machinations of this guy. And so they actually really enjoy this film.
Yeah, and on that last point, I gotta say, Charles Boyer as Gregory does a phenomenal job just with his facial expressions. You're sort of halfway through, you're he's being kind of a jerk and thinking that Paula is this big idiot and kind of just making her feel terrible. But then as time goes on, you get you start to suspect him in this more devious way, and his face really starts to show it, especially the last time. And I'm being purposefully coy because I want to kind of build up to what he's actually doing to Paula in this movie. But the last thing that he does, his realization of it before they go to this performance in public. It was just, he was down on his luck. He was like, dang it.
Yeah.
This isn't what I want to do. This isn't what I want to, how I want to be. This is not how my evening wanted to go. And then he just comes up with a plan.
Yeah.
And the audience does not know what that plan is.
Yeah.
Until it happens in real time with Paula.
But you see the look on his face when he thinks of the plan.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh no, something's about to go down.
At that point, you're like, oh no, something's gonna happen, because it's toward the end of the movie. And if you haven't been paying attention, maybe you're not gonna catch it. But if you have been paying attention, you're absolutely in like this, like holding your heart kind of, oh no, what is he gonna do? What is he gonna do? And so before we jump into the gaslighting of it all, I do want to thank you for suggesting this, because it was a great film, and I'm always interested in, especially for the podcast, watching new movies and just watching new movies in general. But I always like getting recommendations, and I feel like the personal recommendation, just from your class and it fitting the podcast really so well, just that personal recommendation from somebody whose opinion I absolutely trust on film, rather than like, going on Letterboxd or Rotten Tomatoes and going, well, who am I going to get some recommendations from a critic or some schmo on IMDb who's like, this film is, I give it 7 stars. Like, well, I don't even know what that means anymore.
Right.
So personal recommendations are always where it's at. So if you ever have friends, audience, who say you should go watch this because yada, 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 trust what they're saying, because they want you to enjoy the same thing that they did. And you might not. You might, matter of personal taste. But I'm so glad that we decided to do this one from your list of ones that you suggested.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. And before we even talk about the gaslighting, let me say another reason my students actually really like this, completely aside from the gaslighting stuff, is not that they enjoy the gaslighting, but they find it interesting to watch.
Fascinating,
right?
Yeah.
Is that they love how, in their minds, this movie is 100 years old, basically, right?
Yeah.
And they appreciate how an older black and white movie acknowledges like the sexism that can happen in a marriage, right?
Yeah.
And they like how this movie is really pointing out like how controlling he is and how he makes these decisions, and treats her like a child beyond the other stuff that we can talk about tonight. And they just like that a movie is pointing that kind of stuff out as well.
Yeah. And I think the remastered version, which is what I'm pretty sure that I watched, the George Cukor did an amazing job at lighting this black and white movie. So I feel like sometimes younger people who haven't had a lot of experience with black and white films tend to discredit them because some of them are grainy, some of them aren't that well lit, or they haven't been remastered to be better lit. And so they get kind of turned off the fact that it's hard to see. But then I always laugh at that, because then I'm like, well, then you get episodes like the Game of Thrones episode, which was shot during the day and then darkened, and you can't see anything because of that filming technique. And it's so dark, and you're like, what are we doing? This is 2018 or whenever it came out. And we're like, what are we doing? We have so much better film technology. Why are we making it so we can't see anything? And so I think there's a dynamic play at there where there's like the stereotype that black and white film is going to just be hard to watch. And this one is not. This one is, in my opinion, you see Ingrid Bergman's complexion in this movie. It was so well done. So
it is just a great film. I do have to explain to my students before they watch the movie how gaslights work. Because that is actually a plot point, like literal gaslights.
Right.
And I feel like if I don't explain that to them, that actually will be kind of confusing to them.
Yes, and even though the movie is 80 years old this year, the play is only 6 years older than it, right? So the play is only 86 years old, but the setting of the movie is in Victorian London. So we're talking turn of the 20th century from the 19th century, right? So it's even like almost 40 years in the past.
Yeah.
That the play / the film is set. So yeah, there's a lot of dynamics there. You're like, wait, Gaslight, wait, what? I didn't have any problems with it because I lived in a house with gas that acted like that, because there was like a gas fireplace. And so like if you drew gas, so if the fireplace was on and you turned on the stove, yeah, the fire would go down a little bit because the gas was being pulled.
My
and
house
that's
still
part
has like, if you run the dishwasher, like the shower doesn't have enough hot water. So like I like use that as my example. And
Okay,
they're like, that's okay,
analogy.
we get it.
Yeah. I love it. Okay, we get it. All right. Let's talk about gaslighting, right? So gaslighting, the name of the movie, the title of the movie is about the physical apparatus in these large Victorian mansions, homes, whatever. These multi-story flats in the heart of London, where there's a gas line system, and the gas itself powers these chandeliers of light. No light bulbs yet, right? No electricity yet. So everything's fire lit, I guess. And so, and also, I was just rewatching a scene a little bit ago. Gregory also does a roll credit scene where he asks Angela Lansbury's character to light the gas light. And I was like, oh, there you go, a little roll credits moment. But what is gaslighting in the psychological sense, Wind?
When we talk about gaslighting in the sense of intimate partner psychological abuse, usually the definition is one person is trying to make the other person question their perceptions, their memories, and the sort of big picture is to make the target of the gaslighting, the sort of figurative, metaphorical gaslighting, make the target of that feel as if they cannot be sure of their own sanity. Yeah. Right. And that's how it plays out in this film. And so that's why the origin of the term is this film. And so it's the idea that if I am abusing you in any specific example, and then I later say, well, I never said that, or I didn't hit you, or I wasn't drunk. You will question, well, do I remember that right? Is that what happened? Did you really hit me? And especially if I can get other people to back up my side of the story, you maybe are not as confident in your memory, in your perception. And so you maybe won't report me. You will blame yourself for this, right? Yeah. And so I now can maintain my power over you.
Right. Yeah. So it's a form of manipulation and control, right? For unknown, or in the case of Gregory, known reasons, although we don't really know until the end, but we kind of have some clues about it. I went through the etymology of this term. I was just like getting sucked into a Wikipedia rabbit hole. And so the term gaslight obviously predates this movie because of the actual apparatus that existed as part of lighting, right? And to gaslight someone wasn't really that much a part of the lexicon until the gerund was added to it in the 1950s. So instead of gaslight you, I am gaslighting you. In an episode of the Burns and Allen show, and then in the New York Times, Maureen Dowd, included it in a 1995 column that she wrote, op-ed column. And then in 2021, the American Psychological Association sort of gave it this definition that has been sort of circulating around it from the origin of the film and kind of put it there. And then Merriam-Webster finally defined it with the gerund as the psychological manipulation, as you described, right, to cause somebody to question their reality. And so what are some of the things that Gregory does to Paula to question her reality, to have her start questioning her reality?
One of the first times that we see him doing this purposefully, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a cue to the audience, but we don't really realize it until later, is that he gives her this gift. And he says, this was my mother's like pin, basically. And I'm giving it to you. It's very meaningful to me, but it's broken. And I know you lose things sometimes. So go ahead and hold on to it for me, and I'll get it fixed later. And he says, I'm going to put it in your bag. I'm going to put it in your little purse. And you hold on to it for me, and I'll get it from you later, right? And he apparently puts it in her bag, right? But I don't know. Are we doing spoilers yet? I don't know.
Yeah, sure. Let's jump right into it. Yeah.
Okay. So she thinks that he puts it in her bag, and then like go out on this like tour of London, basically. Like they go to the Tower of London.
Yep.
And she's like looking in her bag while they're out of the house, and she thinks like, oh no, I can't find it in my purse. And she sort of panics, and they go back home, kind of call their day off early. And when they get home, he says, oh, can I go ahead and get that pin back from you? I'll go and I'll have it fixed. And she feels terrible. And she says, I lost it.
Yeah.
And he says, I told you not to lose it. And he kind of doesn't make it a big deal. Like he kind of says, well, I'll forgive you because I love you so much. And he's kind of taking the high road here. But we later find out that he did this whole thing on purpose, and he never actually even put it in her bag. And this is sort of like setting up this whole plan, his like long con, basically, of starting this like slippery slope that he's putting her on to make her start to question her perceptions.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the start of the movie to sort of set up this long con, and then we'll go back to the other instances of the actual gaslighting. So, listeners, if you haven't seen this movie, well, you're gonna get spoiled. Obviously, that's the name of the show. It's spoilers. So Gregory is a man that is he is an accompanist in Italy for a singer. Well, who is Paula? Paula is the orphaned niece of a famous opera singer in London. She is murdered.
The aunt.
The aunt. Yeah. Right. And Paula is sent to live in Italy under the ward of an opera teacher, a singing teacher. And she meets Gregory, but this is not by accident. Gregory is actually a guy named Sergius Bauer, who was obsessed with Paula's aunt, wanted to be with her, wanted to meet her, was spurred by the aunt, Linda, and he didn't like that. And I thought that was very incel of him to put this entire con in motion, because he knew that she had these jewels that were very famous and very expensive, very valuable.
From the Tsar of Russia.
Yeah, exactly. And he didn't know where she hid them. And he is actually the reason she is dead. He's her murderer, right? But the only person to have been able to identify him was Paula, and Paula didn't see him in that moment. She only saw him running away because she had come downstairs. So he put this whole thing in motion, knew that Paula was her niece. She did not know who he was. Man, oh man. They date for 2 weeks. I'll just use the modern term. They date for 2 weeks and then just like, let's get married. And she tells her what?
He proposes after 2 weeks.
Yeah, after 2 weeks. And she tells her maestro, I don't really want to do this whole singing thing. I don't have it in me, but I did find a dude and we're in love and all of that stuff. And he's like, well, you got to follow your heart. And I thought it was interesting at the very start because I came in relatively blind to this movie. I knew that the term gaslighting originated from the film, and I know what gaslighting is, but I didn't know how it was going to play out in the movie. But I did get my first hackles up when he was like, oh, I really want to move to London. And she's like, well, I don't know. There's a lot of bad memories for me in London. And he's like, oh, but please, with a cherry on top, let's move to London.
Even before that, right? But besides the fact that he proposes after 2 weeks, she then, after he's proposed, she says, I love you, but I just need some time to think about it. I'm going to go to Lake Como and just like have some time
Yep,
by myself. And he's like, okay. And then she takes the train to Lake Como and he shows up at the train station. Like, how did you even get there before she did?
Yeah, weird.
And he's like, don't be mad. I followed you here. Basically, like, you can't even give her like some space on her own to think about this proposal. Like, you're stalking this woman.
I thought that was weird, but it didn't give me the gaslighting vibes yet.
Right, but it's something that we talk about in the class because it's a sign of this like psychological, it's like a warning flag basically. Like if your abuser is getting that possessive and moving too fast and not giving you space and not like allowing you to say, I need some time. I need to take some space, right? And they're not allowing you to do that. That's a red flag right off the bat right there, right? Yeah. Then we go back to what you're saying where he's like totally manipulating her into moving to the house where her aunt was murdered. So,
very gross.
To go back to what you were saying.
Yeah, it was a very gross overstepping. Like, you don't really know this girl, and you don't know her trauma, and you don't know her sadness associated with her aunt and what their relationship was like. But of course, he needs to move his plan into motion. So he suggests, okay, well, we'll get rid of everything that reminds you of her out of the house, and we'll move it up to the top level, the attic. Right. And we'll board it up, and you don't ever have to look at it ever again. And so they do that, and we cut to some time in the future where they are, doing their...
They have moved all of her aunt's stuff up into the attic, okay? But there are a couple of other things that have occurred just in the time period that we've already covered in this movie. One is, in the time period that they've been living in this house in London, he has completely isolated her. So there is a neighbor woman who's tried to come over and say hi and sort of befriend her. And he has not allowed Paula to either leave the house or to have any visitors. So another part of the psychological abuse that we see in relationships is this isolation of the perpetrator toward the target of the abuse, where I control all of your social life. I choose who your friends are going to be. When I'm not at home, I'm going to monitor who you're talking to. I'm going to take away your cell phone. I'm going to, look at your cell phone records or whatever. You're not allowed to have any friends that I don't approve of, basically. So there's this complete isolation. The other thing that has happened is while they were going through her aunt's stuff, before they moved it all up, she came across this letter that
the letter
he actually had written to her aunt, but while he was still using his his other name, right? Like,
Sturgis.
right, Sturgis. So he had written her aunt this love letter, basically, that her aunt had like tucked away in some sheet music. And Paula finds this letter, is like reading it out loud. And she's like, oh, this is weird. There's this like letter from this weird guy named Sturgis. I wonder what this is. And he just goes bananas and rips it out of her hands and starts screaming at her. And then a little bit later in the movie, she like brings up this letter. She's like, yeah, remember there was that weird letter? And he's like, you're hallucinating. There never was a letter.
Yeah.
And just says that there wasn't, that this thing didn't even exist.
Right. It was so dastardly that he was like, oh, you're hallucinating. There was never a letter. And the interesting thing is he goes and puts it in his desk. Like, you don't think, yeah, you lock your desk, but you don't think that like you may want to get rid of that. It's incriminating is what it is. And
Right.
He decides not to do it, which is ultimately his own undoing because he did leave it in his desk. The desk is broken into later in the movie and she finds it again. And she's like, I didn't hallucinate this.
And it's in his handwriting, which she now knows enough of his handwriting because she's married to this guy that she's like, wait, I think this handwriting matches in. I guess you're Sturgis. Like, so that's no good. Another thing that he does is he starts to take paintings off of the wall and hide them and then accuse her of taking the paintings off of the wall. So that's not great.
A weird little trick, but it works.
Yep.
Right? Because all it is her questioning her ability to keep track of things.
He also hires a maid to work in the house.
Angela Lansbury.
Who is a young Angela Lansbury, who's a fantastic actress.
So good.
And he basically gets Angela Lansbury on his side by like flirting with her basically and hiring someone who he knows is gonna like not get along with Paula. And he kind of pits them against each other. And now he's basically making Paula question like, okay, what did I say? Or are my perceptions like really what she perceives about me? And so he's got like other people basically sort of supporting what he's saying about it. Like the lights aren't going up and down.
Yeah. I want to focus on the gaslight for
right, because we haven't actually explained like what that even is.
So why is the film titled Gaslight? Well, it's because the jewels that Gregory is looking for, he believes are within the stuff of the aunt, right? Of Alice Alquist. So everything is up in the attic, and every night he goes out for some evening stroll. He just tells Paula that he's going out and doing the things that he needs to do as a wealthy socialite. And except he is not going out, he is actually turning the corner down an alley, going up number 7, which is 2 houses down from their flat of number 5, and goes up to the roof and goes into the attic through the skylight. And every night goes through Alice's old stuff, searching for those jewels. And in doing so, he turns on the light up in the attic, which takes gas from all other places in the house, including Paula's room, which is just below the attic. And so every night she hears creaking and walking on the floor above hers, which is supposedly boarded up.
Right.
And notices the gas go down.
Right. And the maid denies it and says, there's nobody else in the house. I don't see the gas changing. I don't hear anything.
Right.
You're crazy.
It's the biggest, I would say it's the biggest reveal when you finally follow Gregory up into the attic and you find him there, and he's searching for the jewels, that he has the light on in there, and you're like, oh, that's why the gas has been going down. That's why the flames have been going down. And like I said, Cooker does a very good job of shooting this. He focuses on the gaslight several times during the movie, and just to show that we perceive it go down, we do see the flame go down. So it can't necessarily be in her imagination, but Gregory tells her it's in her imagination.
Right. And we don't know if we're seeing it because it's actually happening or if we're seeing it because Paula is seeing it. And so it's like, a cinematography thing. Like, oh, we're seeing it through Paula's eyes.
Yeah, from her perspective. Absolutely.
Right. So maybe Paula is actually like slowly going mad. And we actually don't know until that shot pretty near the end of the film, when you actually see Gregory up in the attic looking for these jewels.
Yeah. There are a few other things throughout the movie too. We don't need to belabor the point too much, but I think the turning point for me in how dastardly he was, how devious and terrible, was when impromptu she is invited to a performance by another socialite in the area, and she wants to go. Paula wants to go. She's like, I gotta get out of this house. And Gregory's like, no, I don't want to go. And he yells at her, and he's like, you're not well enough to go, blah, blah, blah. He had already written an RSVP no to this woman and was gonna go about his own business that evening, just like he had done every other evening, right? But she's like, no, I want to go. And he goes into his room, and he's like, man. But this is, again, just with his facial expressions. Man. And then he pulls out his watch, and he looks at his watch, and then he looks up at his mirror, and he has this just like devilish facial expression come up, and you're like, oh man, he's going to do something with that. And then at the party, at the performance, he goes to his vest, and he's looking for his watch, and he's like, where's my watch? And then he goes, Paula, did you take my watch? And she's got her little bag, and she opens it, and she finds his watch in there, and then she has a breakdown in public, right? And you had some conceptual stuff related to this like breakdown in public, right?
Yeah, the reason that that's actually really brilliant on behalf of the writer of that scene is because he's been trying to isolate her this whole time, right? So that he can basically manipulate her, right?
Yeah.
At this point, she's kind of made this call, like, you can't do this to me anymore. I'm going to go out.
Right.
And he has kind of had this problem now, like, oh, I can no longer isolate her. She's going to leave. And he hasn't been able to resort to physical violence, right? And the reason that matters is because the implication we kind of get is she's the one she owns this flat in London. She's the one who owns all of her aunt's stuff. Mm-hmm. So if she were to decide to divorce him, he would no longer have access to any of that stuff. And so she is the one who kind of has the financial power in this relationship, which is atypical for a lot of abusive relationships, unfortunately, like even in modern day, right? A lot of times,
and very rare for the time period as well.
Right, exactly. A lot of times in a heterosexual relationship, it would be the man who would be able to sort of hold that financial power.
Right.
So I think that the reason he hasn't resorted to the physical violence is because we get the idea that like Paula could then potentially ask him for a divorce and he would not have access to those resources. So his psychological manipulation of her is so that he can send her to an asylum mm-hmm. and still have access to all of her stuff, basically.
Yeah.
So he has to do this like public humiliation of her at the party. If I can't stop her from going to the party, I can accuse her of stealing my watch at the party. And she does have this kind of emotional breakdown at the mm-hmm. party. And now he has triumphed, right? Because all of my friends saw you have this emotional breakdown.
Right.
I'm the winner. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking to see him have this moment of triumph, which is her undoing, really.
Right.
And the only reason that she's really saved is because we have this police officer who basically comes and saves the day.
Right.
Because he's sort of like infatuated with her.
Yeah, believing that she's Aunt Alice. Yeah.
Well, because I mean, he doesn't literally believe that she's Aunt Alice, but she looks similar
she looks
enough,
like her.
right?
Right.
And
And
he was
that's
infatuated with her aunt.
Yeah, he was right, clearing that up. He was infatuated with her aunt, like many people were in this particular time period and fiction. And he saw Paula return to London, was like double taken, like, what?
Yeah.
She's back? How is a ghost returned? But then realizes that things are very peculiar about the whole situation. Gets one of the patrol constables to be his eyes and ears, because the constable gets very intimate with the maid, Nancy, which I think is quite the connection that they've got going on there. But yeah, he comes in and he saves the day. They're able to subdue and tie up Gregory in the attic, and Paula goes up and has an amazing monologue about her experiences over the last, X number of months or whatever it has been. Excuse me. And almost looks like she's gonna stab this guy.
Yeah.
But tosses away the knife, I think knowing better that it would make her feel better to make him suffer, almost as if she gets to watch people do what she did to him, what he did to her, excuse me.
And that speech is just amazing. The way that she pretends to be his, like, still under his spell, just to make a point of, like, it's just wonderful.
Look into my...
And he even tries to manipulate her in that moment. He's like, I believe I meant something to you, and I still do. And it's like, oh, gross, dude.
Yeah.
Like, I think you know now. I think you know now. But then, of course, there's this quite a bit of... I think we disagree somewhat on the ending, because the inspector comes in and is like, hey, I'd like to see you again. So what are your thoughts on the ending here?
So it is like all kind of like wrapped up in a nice little bow at the end.
Yeah.
And I do have to say it's a little uncomfortable for me and some of my students, where it seems like she's basically just going to transfer her love pretty fast to this new police inspector guy who basically sort of saves the day at the end. And they're having this like little romantic, like sort of balcony scene at the end where he's like, can I come and see you? And she's like, okay. And so it kind of just seems like another Prince Charming has come and swept her off of her feet. And he seems like a nice guy, like, that's fine. But it's just kind of like moving from one guy right to the next guy, right? Like, I feel like Paula could take some time to kind of like do her own thing, like she could maybe spend some time on her own for a little while.
And I mostly agree with you. I don't know if necessary that she's gonna get right back into it. I hope she doesn't. But I mean, this it does kind of mirror real life in a sense, because it's hard for the gaslighted in a relationship to like pull themselves out of that funk, the funk that has been slowly growing over time, because that's what the gaslighting is, right? It is this slow manipulation over time. And so it's hard for, a lot of people bring up things like Stockholm syndrome. Why does so-and-so stay with their abuser, blah, blah, blah. Belle and Beast and for your Disney Stockholm syndrome. But the idea here is it is observed that the Gaslight head have trouble with self-regulation after they've removed themselves from that situation and not seeking external validation for their own reality. And because it ends the way that it does, as you say, you're worried for Paula. It's just like we've already seen how manipulable she is.
Right.
Is it really ending positively for her? And I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true. So now that we've gone through all of the plot and all of the ways that Gregory gaslit her, I wanted to come back to the part of the discussion we had at the beginning, which was, how people use this, right? It became trendy. It was a word that a lot of young people were using, but also being found in the amateur psychology self-help world, right? Or the social media pop psychology, right? On TikTok videos, these kinds of things where you're like, so-and-so, he's gaslighting you, blah, blah, blah. And like I said, I see a lot of people use it incorrectly. You said, for the most part, your students were using it properly. So what gaslighting is not is a single occurrence, a single lie, a single persuasion, a single manipulation. It can't just be one time period. Well, maybe not time period, but like one thing, we'll call it one event of persuasion and manipulation. It's a series of manipulations.
I think that's true in the most correct sense of the word, right? It's planned, it's long term, right? It's not just a one-off.
Right.
And that's probably the way that people use it the most incorrectly.
Yeah.
But I think that the sort of sense of the word is like the way that people are using it today, I think, is basically like, you're manipulating me to make me think something did or didn't happen that really didn't or did happen, right? And so I guess I don't mind it if they're using it in that way.
I see.
Like if the spirit of it is there where you're like purposely tricking me, even if it's one time.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like, words do change, of course. And I did stumble across a Washington Post article from 2022 in response to Merriam-Webster. Well, maybe not in response because it actually happened before, but that it was a word of caution that it would become a trendy buzzword and lose that spirit that you're talking about. Right. And change so much that why even use it at all? Because its intended meaning is no longer valid here. Right. I hear it when people are saying, well, he's just lying to me. And then they'll say, well, he's gaslighting you. And it's just,
okay.
Because lies do come with a sense of, I need to flip the script onto you, and if it's a big lie, right? I'm gonna flip the narrative back on your face, so I don't have to keep the lie going. Now it's on you to accept my lie, basically. And I wouldn't say that's in the spirit of the term, but I do take your point.
I think for me, it's just not all lies are gaslighting, of course.
Right.
For me, I would say it's a particular kind of manipulation.
Sure.
Where I'm trying to make you question your memory or your perception.
Yeah.
As a way of manipulating you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's more important than the time. Is the purpose and the technique matter to me more than the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, to me, the analogy would be like using the term like con artist, right?
Sure.
So you can have a con artist who's like the quick and dirty con artist. I'm trying to sell you gold at the gas station, that's like, I'm saying that this is like a $500 necklace when it's really a $50 necklace.
Yeah.
Or I can have the long con where I make you fall in love with me so that I can, get your inheritance.
Right.
Like either of those is a con,
Sure.
but it's the short con versus the long con. And so to me, gaslighting is almost the same, where I can gaslight you, for one event that happened, and I can be like, I didn't actually like harass you. You misunderstood the situation. Or I can gaslight you because, we're in a relationship.
Mm.
So to me, it's more about what is the motivation and the technique than about the timing.
I hear that. Yeah, I take that. That's a good way to explain it. What I want to make clear is that it's not general relationship disagreement. Just because you're having a spat or a row with your partner does not mean they are gaslighting you, right?
100% agree with that.
Yeah.
Just because you disagree or just because
yeah.
someone lied doesn't make it gaslighting.
Yes. Absolutely. Questioning reality, it's going to end, you're going to end up getting liar, liar, pants on fire because of the gaslight. Ha ha ha. I wanted to talk about.
I see what you did
there. I want to talk about some of the research surrounding gaslighting in your area, right? Relationship violence space. And then some of the stuff that I stumbled on as far as like who is more likely to do gaslighting. So I wanted to hear about this self-report scale that you shared in our notes document. Can you explain a little bit more about this new scale that's out?
Yeah, so I came across this scale. I'm teaching right now a different class, not the psychology and film class, but the course is a relationship violence class where we read articles about relationship violence and we talk about sort of classic studies, but also contemporary research that's being done right now. And one of the 2024 articles that I came across was one where they published a self-report scale. So it's used in research to understand like how common are these things, and then correlate experiences with relationship abuse with like other variables that we would look at in research. And so this is a scale to measure, are you being gaslighted by your partner, basically. So they replicated the scale in two cultures. And this was in the United States and Turkey, I believe, if I remember correctly. And they have basically 11 items that you can use to assess whether or not your partner is gaslighting you. Yeah. And in the article, they point out that the pronouns can be changed to be whatever pronouns are relevant to your partner. So I liked that they were acknowledging any gender can gaslight any other gender. Right. So I'll just read a couple of these examples because I think they really kind of illustrate what kinds of specific behaviors are we talking about here. And we can think about like, did Gregory see in the film to Paula? Right. Yeah. Exactly. So things like, my partner often denies saying things that I remember him saying, right? So like, I never said that. So I'm trying to remember if Gregory ever says like, I never said that, but it would be things like, well, you never saw the letter. Right. Yeah. So that never happened.
You were hallucinating.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
My partner makes me question my memory about things that happen between us. He certainly does that.
Yeah, does that like throughout the entire grift. Yeah.
Right. My partner makes me think I'm distorting things. Absolutely. Well, and she thinks that she's like distorting the sounds and the gaslights, right? And he's never there because he's like rooting through her aunt's stuff. Yeah. But just making the servants go against her so that they're not going to confirm her perceptions, right? Things like that. My partner thinks I'm blowing things out of proportion. He certainly does that, right? My partner accuses me of all kinds of things, like and he says this kind of stuff to her throughout the movie. You forget things, right? You are emotional. You
you're unwell. Yeah.
Right. You're treating the servants either too nicely or you're treating the servants badly, right? He completely accuses her all the time of like not knowing how to treat servants. So I think all of these things he does to her. It's on some level or in some version of these things.
Yeah, there would be a lot of the scale is 1 never to 5 always, and there'd be if Paula was doing this, there would be a lot of 5s.
Yeah.
High score achieved. A score of 55.
Right.
Right? Oh my gosh. Yeah, so I thought it was really interesting that there is a gaslighting scale out there. It sounds like it sounds like it's got some good face validity going on, especially with what we're talking about here, right? I'm wondering is how old is the scale?
It just came out in 2024.
Okay. So it has a little
new
work to be done to get, some cross validation going on with other measures. Okay. I like it though. And 11 items, I always like a small scale, a short scale.
Yeah. Easier to put it in research, easier to use. And so if people are looking for this, it's the GREI.
GREI. Very cool. I found an article that was describing the kinds of people that are more prone to gaslighting, and I was so fascinated. I went down another rabbit hole this morning. Right. So broadly speaking, the people who gaslight, you won't be surprised to learn that they are the ones who likely have maladaptive behavior patterns or personality traits.
Shockingly.
Right. It's like, who are we naming now? It's what you would expect, right? The people who engage in this kind of sociopathic, one author talks about gaslighting in a book about sociopathy. So like this sociopathic behavior stems from these behavior patterns and these personality disorders. Most of them are personality disorders, I suppose. Sure. But some that I extracted were bipolar disorder, which I thought was really fascinating because you don't necessarily think about someone with a depressive type disorder engaging in this kind of, because it takes a lot of effort, right? Especially if you're going to be doing it in the way that Gregory did it, right? And not the way that more modern, a more modern approach would be, like we discussed a few minutes ago. But I was like, oh yeah, bipolar disorder, that makes sense maybe during periods of mania rather than the periods associated with depression and bipolar disorder. But bipolar disorder is also comorbid with a lot of other interesting psychological issues. But moving beyond that, I was not surprised when I found narcissistic personality disorder on that list.
Which I think that Gregory displays a lot of narcissistic symptoms, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned incel before, but he immediately struck me as this person who, like, really thought he could make it with this celebrity Alice Alquist, a famous opera singer within the lore of the story, and she's like doesn't give him the time of day, and he's like, "Damn it, woman! This is what I want. This is what I deserve, and you don't get to tell me no."
Because he was her piano accompanist as well, right? And she basically was like, well, the Tsar of Russia is in love with me, so I feel like I'm going to go with that guy.
Yeah, I'm going to have a little bit more fun with him. Sorry, making your pittance as a pianist, right?
Right.
Not even a famous pianist, an accompanist. So, like, yikes, buddy.
And we find out that he has a wife, like back in Prague, I think.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, he had like another wife, like waiting for him to find the jewels, like back in Prague.
I missed that part. Okay, I'm gonna have to go back and look.
Prague or Hungary or whatever country he was from.
Right. He's definitely got an accent. And I thought that was I talked about this in the intro. I thought it was an amazing use of an American studio putting two stars that were speaking English, which was not their first language.
Yeah.
Solid movie. And then of course the rest of the people were British, but yeah, very, very cool that they did it like that. But I missed that. Tidbit. But it doesn't surprise me because we see very little reciprocated love between the two of them, except for maybe a couple of kisses here and there.
Right. And there's a moment where she's actually in her bedroom and she's frightened and she says, "Please come into the bedroom and hold me and be with me tonight." And he's
Mm-hmm.
like, I got to go do my businessman stuff. And
Yeah.
he like walks out. And it's pretty clear that she's basically saying like, I would like to be with my husband in the way of, two adults who love each other. And he's like, bye.
Yeah, right. And with somebody that looks like Ingrid Bergman, you're like, really, dude?
Yeah.
He had to be faithful to his other wife, apparently.
Right.
He's got morals, Wind. I'm sorry. He can't just go sleeping around other people,
right,
with other people when he's trying to steal their jewels.
he's got a line that he just won't cross.
Everyone's got a line in the sand, right? Pick your brain about this other piece of research related content, which is this power and control wheel. So just sort of broadly speaking, what is this wheel used for? How do we interpret this wheel?
So this is a really popular tool for professionals in the field who are working with current victims of relationship abuse who maybe don't realize what's happening to them, right? So if someone went to Paula in this movie and said, let's think about how Gregory is treating you and maybe try to sort of label what these behaviors are, right? It's a good way to kind of see things more objectively, maybe, and actually label them as abuse. So if people who are listening just do an online search for the term power and control wheel, this visual will come up. And it's used in like emergency shelters for people who are in relationships. It's used by social workers and counselors, nurses and doctors. So it basically identifies 7 or 8 types of psychological abuse, because often when we talk about abuse, we only can objectively define physical and sexual abuse, and it's just so much harder to define psychological abuse because it's subjective.
Yeah.
So it lists these forms of psychological abuse, and examples are things like the isolation we talked about earlier, where he keeps her away from family and friends and doesn't let her go out of the house.
Yeah.
Things like using economic abuse against her, where it seems like even though she's the owner of the house and she is the one who sort of has the finances, like the maybe these jewels, right, that he's looking for.
She also has the one that like that also brings her the status.
Right. But the idea is that the person who's kind of using power over the other person in the couple maybe says like, you're not allowed to have access to the bank account. You're not allowed to have access to the money. You're on an allowance. You need to show me the receipts when you go shopping and give me the change. So just not allowing someone to have their own financial independence so that they really can't leave the relationship even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Something like using coercion and threats, right? Like if you ever tried to leave me, I would kill you, for example.
Makes
or
zero sense, but I get it.
The emotional blackmail of I would try to kill myself, right? So laying that kind of a guilt trip on someone.
Right.
In this case, there weren't children, but using children against the person is on the power and control wheel. So that could be things like trying to get children on my side so that they accuse you of like causing the abuse to happen, or saying if you tried to leave, I would get custody of the kids, things like that. And then another one that's on here, which I always bring up with my classes, is using male privilege. So in a traditional sort of stereotypical heterosexual couple, it's often the case that there's a male perpetrator using abuse against a female partner. But I do want to acknowledge that I absolutely believe that an abuser could be of any gender toward any other gender. Right?
Yeah.
So there are versions of the power and control wheel that basically just say using privilege. And so let's say we're like a same sex or same gender couple.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the person who just makes more money can say like, well, I get to make the decisions.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay.
Or even if it's a gay couple, it could be something like, I'm going to threaten to out you without your permission.
Yeah.
Right.
Ooh.
So there are special types of abuse that can happen with like LGBTQ couples.
Right. This is phenomenal graphic, the one that Wynn shared with me. I'm going to put it in the show notes. I'm going to link it. I'm going to find it online and link that, of course, but it's very, very interesting. And the one that Wynn shared has the her and she, mostly her, pronouns in here. So the assumption is that, and it has the word male privilege. So the assumption is that from this wheel in particular, this one is for a heterosexual couple, where the woman in the relationship is seeking care and support outside of their relationship. Yeah, for any number of these abuses.
Right. So there are other versions with just acknowledging other genders are possible.
Mm-hmm.
There's also one that's specific for college students that talks about like types of control within a college world.
Okay.
Like
trying to some specific language.
Like specific types of abuse. So things like trying to control your schedule of classes, things like that.
Yeah. Things with dorms, I would imagine.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. That's actually really helpful, including that in a college course. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank Wynn Goodfriend for joining me to discuss Gaslight. Wynn, before we say goodbye, is there anything you'd like to plug other than what we talked about at the top of the show, or a repeat of those things from the top of the show?
I'll just remind people to check out any of those three things. My new intro psych textbook, which is Psychology in Our Curious World.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at my new Cults docuseries through the great courses. It's called Warping Reality. Or you can check out the new book I co-edited called The Handmaid's Tale Psychology. That's
awesome, Wynn. It's so great having you on and talking about all of these things. Thanks again for joining me.
I would love to come back, and maybe next time we could watch a movie about cults and talk about psychology.
That would be amazing. Yeah, let's do that for your record 8th time.
All right.
Until the next episode, thanks for listening.